I stand and speak and walk around and point these, that's gonna be okay? You know what you're doing? I was always very thoughtful. And in the chat, you didn't really never knew who's gonna come in with a very reasoned approach. I missed Tom.
Oh, no, one of them was,
Hey, guys. Hey.
Hi.
The whole gang? Yeah, man, how about that?
Yeah.
Good things, except for Philip, but I know he'll be.
Who's supposed to sit here?
That's Philip's place. All
Oh, Phil, he's not coming. But he's not coming.
right, everyone got that new memorandum that was set out this afternoon? Okay, cool.
I think they're here too.
The voice is coming.
Good, how are you? There, aren't you? Cute.
Fly in the chair.
I like it. It's the napping chair. I should have sat there. Not until the point.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, Planning Commission, September 7th, 2023. I call this meeting to order. Paula, may you please have the roll call?
Patty Case.
Here.
Cody Cornett,
Here.
John Grant,
Here.
Usher. Maria Pena.
Here.
Mark Popoff
Here.
and Nick Portella.
Thank you. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you. Next is the approval of the agenda. If all the commissioners have reviewed the agenda, may I please have a motion to approve the agenda along with a second?
A motion to approve the agenda. Second.
Thank you. Motion to approve the agenda has been motion, or the agenda has been motion to be approved and seconded. All in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. If all the commissioners have had an opportunity to review the minutes from both the August 3rd and the August 17th meeting, may I please have a motion to approve those minutes with a second?
One at a time, please.
One at a time. The August 3rd meeting, may I please have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the August 3rd minutes.
A second.
Thank you. All in favor to approve the minutes from the August 3rd meeting, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. May I please have a motion to approve the August 17th minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the meetings.
A second.
Thank you. The minutes from the August 17th meeting has been motioned to be approved and seconded. May all in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
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 Excuse me. Everyone needs to really speak into your microphones, especially the people with little voices. Use your outside voices.
Do you need to say, do that again? Okay. Next is the time for public comment. During this portion of the meeting, anyone may speak on any subject that does not later appear on the agenda. 5 minutes per person will be allowed. Now, we have a lot of people in the audience right now. That's great. Public comment would be anything that's not later in the agenda. So if your public comment involves something regarding signs or billboards, now would not be the time to say that. Does anyone have any public comment other than signs or billboards or anything like that? Yes, sir. When you come up, please state your name and address for the record. Yes, please. Yes.
Properties located at 500 East Third Street, the Dalles. I'm here tonight to get information about Basalt Commons development regarding the parking plan for the development and request answers to a few questions. I understand I'm not going to get those answers tonight and that you'll respond to them at a later date, and that's fine. As far as I know, there has not been a formal site plan submitted. Right now, I feel there is a lack of information and communication regarding details of their parking plan from the developers and the city's planning department, even though that information is available. My hope is that there will be ample opportunity for public input and that important decisions made by people elected to represent the citizens of the Dalles rather than by city staff alone. To be clear, I'm not opposed to the development, but I am opposed to the development not being required to provide adequate parking, off-street parking. According to the code, the minimum required parking for the development is not less than one parking space for every dwelling unit, which equates to 108 spaces. The minimum required parking, the minimum required for a commercial ground floor of which is around 9,800 square feet, averages between 3 and 7 spaces per 1,000 square feet, depending on the type of business. Using 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet as an example, that would be an additional 39 spaces. And if they expanded the ground floor to 2 stories because of the additional 5 feet of height from the conditional use permit, then the requirement would be 78 additional spaces. So right now, at a minimum, the municipal code would require 147 off-street parking spaces. Developments such as this are exactly why the code was enacted in the first place. So there would be adequate parking to support residences, commercial activity, and customers. It's possible that the minimum number of off-street parking required by the code is less than what's actually needed if residences average more than 1 car per dwelling unit, along with the staff of the complex, employees of the commercial units, customers of those commercial businesses, and visitors of the residences. Other than their preliminary plan submitted over a year ago, showing only 36 off-street parking spots, I do not have any idea of how many dedicated off-street parking spots are current in the current plan. And I don't think that's public knowledge. I understand they've expanded that some with purchase of a piece of property.
Sure. And I just want to let you know, we do only have 5 minutes and you only got about a minute left.
Okay. And I lost my place. Can you give me a couple seconds?
Sure.
Okay, I'll try to speed up my reading. It would appear that the planning department has decided to waive the parking requirements and depend on the difference being made up with on-street parking in the general vicinity of the development. I'm not sure if there's even enough on-street parking in the general vicinity to satisfy the additional parking needed above their dedicated off-street parking. And most of those on-street parking spots are in the prohibited parking district. My perception is there is not and will be competition between existing businesses, customers, and residences to find a place to park even reasonably close where they work, shop, and live. There is a municipal code that states minimum maximum off-street parking may be waived for development in the CBC2 zone of the central business district. It does not state that the parking requirements are waived, must be waived, or exempt. From my understanding, this is possibly a staff decision, so I'm not sure it has to be approved by the Planning Commission, which if so is just plain wrong. And I think the code is not being used as it was intended for small footprint developments in the downtown core area where on-street parking would work rather than required off-street parking. To make generalized comparisons of potential vehicle ownership of the apartment residences between the Dalles and large metro areas where people work, live, and do business in a more confined area and depend on public transportation for travel outside their prime area seems presumptive and inappropriate, as the two areas are much different in population density. And you have my questions.
I do.
Save it for there.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
and this will go on the record.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Warren. All right, next item on the agenda, item 7, quasi judicial public hearing. There's a script that goes along with this, so bear with me. Now is the time specified for the Planning Commission to conduct a public hearing. The purpose of this public hearing is to consider the following matter. Appeal number 033-23 of the Community Development Director's denial of sign permit number 2589-23 by J.R. Zukin Corp. doing business as Meadow Outdoor Advertising. They are the appellant. The substantive criteria upon which the Planning Commission will base its decision in this matter are found in the Dalles Municipal Code Land Use and Development Ordinances, Article 3.010, 3.020, 13.020, and 13.0.50. A public hearing is required by law and certain rules apply. First and foremost, you must be recognized by the chair in order to speak and present testimony. When recognized by the chair, please unmute your microphone and state your name and mailing address for the record. The hearing is required by law to be tape recorded. Generally, the public hearing procedure is as follows. Prior to the public hearing, a determination will be made of the qualifications of the commission members and allow for challenges from the audience. I will open the public hearing with the staff report. The purpose of the staff report at this point is to further identify the applicable criteria of the case being considered and to provide background information about that case. After the staff report, we will hear testimony from the applicant. Next, we will hear testimony from the proponents, those persons in favor of the application. Next, there will be testimony from the opponents, those not in favor of the application. Next, there will be testimony from anyone else who wishes to offer testimony or ask questions. Then, to honor the right of rebuttal, we will again hear from the proponents. To expedite the hearing, the commission members may ask questions of any person as they testify. When this process has been concluded, we will close the public testimony portion of the hearing. During the hearing, some important standards apply. First of all, those who testify must hold their testimony to the decision criteria. As in all land use hearings, there are a complete set of rules, procedures, and criteria we must follow. Second, failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the commission members and the parties an opportunity to respond to that issue precludes an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Third, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with details specific enough to allow the city to respond to that issue precludes an action for damages in the circuit court. Fourth, prior to the conclusion of the public hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application. If such a request is made, the law states the commission must grant the request by either continuing the hearing to a time and date at least 7 days from the date of the initial hearing, or the record must be kept open for a period of at least 7 days. These are the rules. Are there any questions? Okay. Have any of the members of the commission had any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, or bias which would prevent you from rendering an impartial decision on this matter?
No.
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 Does anyone in the audience wish to challenge the qualifications of any members of the commission? Okay, no. The public hearing is now open. Please turn your ringers off. The public hearing is now open. May we please have the staff report?
Evening. Good evening, Chair Cornett, Commissioners Joshua Chandler, Community Development Director. 1 second here so I can share my screen. All right, thank you everyone for coming. As mentioned, this is we are here this evening to discuss appeal number 033-23, sign permit appeal number 2589-23, the appellant J.R. Zukin Corporation doing business as Meadow Outdoor Advertising. One quick correction in your staff report. I incorrectly cited the address. It should be West 2nd Street. So it's shown on pages 1, 3, and 7 of your staff report. So I just wanted to provide that to you. Information included in this text, in this presentation is correct. My apologies on any confusion. So some additional material that was made available to you either through an email or on the dais are 3 memos, two of them today, one of them from the other 2 days ago. The one from 2 days ago, Dunn Carney LLP. This is the appellant's counsel. The 2 today, both myself and the city attorney sent out a memorandum just a little bit ago. So this is the subject property. The circle there highlights the billboard in question that we're discussing here. It's a picture of the billboard. Current advertisement was removed for this presentation purpose. The dimensions, the face is 8 foot by 16 feet. The height is 24 feet. This is the proposal. Proposal would be the dimensions, the same height with a larger face, 8 foot by 24 foot. A little bit of a project timeline here. The sign permit was submitted February 16th, 2023. It was then denied. There was a former staffer that actually incorrectly issued the sign permit, thinking it was merely a routine maintenance. After the appellants contacted me with some questions on this, I sent out a confirmation email denying the application formally on February 27th. Now looking at the appeal that we have in front of us, the appeal was filed July 7th. The appeal was deemed complete August 4th. Notice of appeal was sent to property owners within 300 feet on August 24th, and tonight's planning commission meeting is September 7th. The staff's basis of denial is that the replacement billboard exceeded the total number allowed within 1 mile. This was the data on the screen here that was used to make this determination. And looking at non-highway signs alone, this replacement billboard is the 14th sign within that 1 mile radius. As a point of reference, this denied sign permit or appeal request does not require the existing sign to be removed. These are the 14 counted out. So really the interpretation at issue is Dallas Municipal Code 1013-50-150C2. City streets, the maximum number of advertising signs shall not exceed 8 per mile, with no more than 5 on one side of the street, no closer than 300 feet apart when measured at right angles to the street center line to which the sign is oriented. So the first sentence there is really, I'm going to go through here and kind of dissect the sentence, but the first sentence here is really what we're looking at. And this is the interpretation in question. Staff's interpretation is a radial mile. The appellant's interpretation is a road or linear mile. So therefore, in looking at this section right here, maximum number of advertising signs shall not exceed 8 per mile. Staff would apply a radial measurement to that as shown on a previous screen. And in the case of the appellant, they would apply the 8 per mile on the road itself. So this interpretation, really the same language, more or less, has been in a sign regulation for the city of Dallas since at least 1974. There was later amendments after 1974 that distinguished between city streets and highways. And really the only change there was allowing for a decreased spacing between signs. City streets have a 300-foot spacing. Highways have a 500-foot spacing. In 1992, the appellant requested that the Planning Commission add road mile into the sign ordinance to be consistent with their interpretation. However, upon adoption, road mile was never included into the sign ordinance. So it stayed the same as it did in 1974. And as you know, this seems redundant, this next sentence, but the existing language has been unchanged since 1992. So staff then generated, they took, for the sake of argument, they took the interpretation of a road linear mile and generated this through a GIS system. And this is going off the linear mile. So no more than 8 signs per linear mile on all roadways in the urban growth boundary. And only signs in the CG and industrial zones are permitted. Billboards in all other zones are not permitted in the Dallas Municipal Code. This does not take into account split zone roadways. So therefore, if there is a road that has one zone on one side, one zone on the other, we decided to take all of those out because we can't, with this system, we weren't able to put the information in to be able to tell whether or not it's on one side of the street or the other. So for the sake of argument, we removed all of those. So therefore, there could be more on the screen. In addition, this does not take into account ODOT requirements for signs. And it also doesn't take into account any business plans that a business may have for placing signs. But in looking at the code alone, if a linear mile were the interpretation, there's easily 100 billboards that could be placed, probably around 150 billboards that could be placed in the city of the Dalles. So in filing the appeal, staff had coordinated or corresponded with the appellant multiple times since last October. And in the last conversation in June, staff took a closer look into the municipal code regarding filing an appeal and discovered multiple procedural inconsistencies with chapter 10.13, which is sign regulations, and then 10.3, which is the application procedures section of the code or chapter of the code. So in looking at these two statements, the first from the sign code, any person aggrieved by a determination of the director may appeal to the Planning Commission. And then the other statement is the approval or denial of a ministerial action shall be the city's final decision. Ministerial action is a building permit, sign permit, change of use. So really in looking at this, there is no mechanism to appeal a denied sign permit aside from action in Wasco County Circuit Court. In Oregon land use, appeals are to be submitted within a reasonable time from the date of denial. In our code, administrative and quasi-judicial decisions are required to submit a notice of appeal within 10 days from denial. As we mentioned earlier, the sign permit 2589-23 was denied on February 27, 2023, 18 weeks from the date the notice of appeal was submitted. And as of today, it's about 27 weeks ago. So in recognizing these inconsistencies, staff moved. Ultimately, staff decided to err on the side most benefit to the appellant and allowed this appeal to move forward. And in doing so, we offered a concession. It's included as attachment 5, with the goal, the real core goal of amending these inconsistencies of chapter 10.13. So the two options were basically move forward with this appeal. In doing so, staff would have to spend their time, their resources defending this appeal. Or the second option would be collaborating, staff and the appellant collaborating on amending these inconsistencies and trying to fix the sign code. But at the end, the appellant provided no response whatsoever and instead, 3 weeks later, submitted the notice of appeal. So the review criteria that you'll see in this staff report, similar to others, there's this one, criterion that are met and criterion that are not met. For this conversation, we're not going to discuss criterion that are met. We're really just going to discuss those that are not met. The criterion that are not met, finding 19 and finding 20, A, B, and C. As a reminder, an application may not be approved if criteria are not met. Finding number 19, outdoor advertising signs shall have metal primary structural members. Structural information was not included on the sign permit application. Therefore, this criterion was not met. But really, I think the conversation here is looking at the main point, Dallas Municipal Code, Chapter 1013, 50, 150. I mentioned it earlier, I won't reiterate it, but there is a second sentence that I did leave off. Sign area shall not exceed 288 square feet with a maximum dimensions of 12 feet vertical and 24 feet horizontal. So finding 20, A, B, and C really centers around this first sentence. Finding 21, sign area shall not exceed 28 square feet, as I just mentioned, 288 square feet, as I just mentioned. Staff found that criteria was met, so therefore we're not going to discuss it any further this evening. In finding 20, taking a look at it, dissecting it, there are really 3 requirements for sign placement in this one sentence. First requirement, this shall not exceed 8 per mile. Second is that there be no more than 5 on one side of the street. The third is that no closer than 300 feet apart when measured at right angles to the street center line to which the sign is oriented. So in looking at finding 20A, this is broken out as requirement number 1. This is really the section of that sentence that is the questioning of this interpretation is really just in this section, or in this part right here. So in looking at, when you're looking at measurements in our code, it's, when you just look at this right here, it may seem as, open for interpretation, but really, the Dallas Municipal Code is very clear. Chapter 10.6, Article 6.070 explains how measurements are made. Unless listed elsewhere in the code, measuring standards from Article 6.070 will apply. The measuring distance. Distances are measured horizontally. When determining distances for setbacks and structure dimensions, all distances are measured along a horizontal plane from the appropriate property line, edge of building, structure, storage area, parking area, or other object. These distances are not measured by following the topography of the land. So really looking at this first sentence, getting into this a little bit more. When measuring horizontally, staff uses geographic information systems. Geographic information system, currently the city uses Esri GIS software, it's probably the top GIS software in the game. It's administered by Wasco County. This is a widely used computer-aided system. I'm sure nowadays almost everybody has used GIS at some point and maybe not even know it. but it's used for the police, the planning department, the tax assessor, the surveyor. This allows for, when you're doing measurements, this allows for pinpoint accuracy. Without GIS, measuring distances can be unreliable, inaccurate, and prone to human error. So in using GIS, we use something called a buffer tool. A buffer tool is a geoprocessing tool that creates buffer polygons around input features to a specified distance. So here they are points, lines, and polygons. Those are basically the three inputs that you put into a system in your GIS buffer tool. You enter those into your system and you create a specified distance around that point. We did that here using GIS buffer tool. You'll see there's a 1 mile polygon or 1 mile buffer, excuse me, that was created around the subject billboard. It's there in red. So looking ahead to the second sentence, or the third sentence, if you will, these distances are not measured by following the topography of the land. Really think about it, this picture really kind of sums it up. Makes sense. I mean, if you're using distances on measuring the topography of the land, you're going to have a different measurement between a lot with a rolling hill on it compared to a flat lot. So topography is not specifically listed in the Dallas Municipal Code. And then when this happens and you need a term, you go to the most commonly used definitions that you can find. And these three that I listed here, I won't speak to them verbatim. These are common Google search, type in topography, and these are going to be the things that pop up. But if you look at them, they include, I've highlighted them, they include artificial and man-made features. Artificial man-made features. For an example, roads. Roadways and streets are not factors in determining distance. Therefore, the road linear interpretation is incorrect. Looking at finding number 20B, ultimately, this is looking at no more than 5 on one side, and really that first statement staff found, as mentioned, more signs. The replacement billboard exceeded the amount allowed within that 1 mile. So therefore, requirement, no additional analysis was taken on this proposed sign. The same goes with finding number 20C, which is no closer than 300 feet apart. We already determined from the very beginning that exceeded 8 per mile. So therefore, no additional analysis was taken into this. With that, staff has provided some alternatives for you. I won't read all of them, but I will read the one that is recommended by staff. Move to adopt resolution number PC 618A-23, a resolution denying the appeal and affirming staff's denial of sign permit number 2589-23, based upon the findings of fact and conclusions of law set forth in the agenda staff report. And really looking ahead at next steps before we get into this meeting, I just want to let everyone know that no matter the decision this evening, staff fully intends on beginning a comprehensive review of the city's regulatory system and process for signs, so we don't get into the issue that we're having tonight. And with that, I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
I'm thinking for a second.
So is there any decision in the history of the planning department where the use of mile, that use of measurement is specifically identified?
So yes,
Or how it should be used?
yeah. So the memo that I sent out just about 2 hours before this meeting, after receiving the memo from the appellant's counsel claiming that linear mile, road mile is historically how it's been done in the Dalles. Every staff member in our department, aside from one, he was out of the office, went into all of our files, exhaustive search, all of our files. We searched for every sign permit in our logbook data, which goes back to 2006. We searched all of our digital files, which are from 2018. And then I also got on GIS. It's a handy tool. And I found every single address within 100 feet of a billboard within the city of the Dalles. And we searched every single one of those properties. It was probably about 200 properties in total. And in doing that, the information that we found, as you'll see in the notice of appeal, there are 42 billboards owned and operated by Meadow Outdoor. We found 20 permits. 2 of those were duplicates. 3 of those were for the maintenance and repair of billboards. Therefore, they didn't even require a permit. So really, we found 15 permits. And of those, 4 of them referenced this linear distance on the permit itself. So therefore, 11 of them had no mention whatsoever of this linear distance or how close a new billboard or a placement billboard was from any other billboard around.
Okay.
So I think you had it on slide number 2, I think, on the interpretation of the distance, and then you had a reference that went to for a radius. And is there any reference in the code that will reference back to going into a radius?
The reference in the code is ultimately looking at the measurement section of the code that talks about measuring in a horizontal distance.
But
So-
does it show in that section that it would need to reference that point? Or that you would go back to reference there, or is it just?
In that section, it mentions that you begin from a point or an edge of a building or an edge of an object, and you measure horizontally out. So if you were to take that radius, you could imagine drawing horizontal lines all around like a clock in that radius.
So it's, I mean, basically how it's kind of written out is pretty open for interpretation for the most part. If you were just going through and opening up and reading through.
If you were to open that code by itself and look at not to exceed 8 per mile, all by itself, it is up for interpretation. But when it happens all the time in land use, you always have to reference another section, another code. That's how codes are written. And that's what we have to do when we are dealing with measurements. We need to know how to measure something. There's other sections in the sign code that talk about sandwich board signs. Sandwich board signs have diagrams that specifically show you how to measure point to point to point. But if nothing is referenced in the code section that we're working with, we have to go to another section to find out how to actually measure something. That's where we came to the conclusion that it should be done on a radius. There is no mention that it should be done on a road. The only mention to that is that it should not be measured on topography. You can imagine if you have a roadway that's just curving around, ultimately, if you go off that road distance, you're going to be calculating on the entire curve. You're going to be calculating up and down a hill. And that measurement clearly says that you do not measure using topography.
And then I had one more question. Did you have any data? You had for the permit, you had all of the things that the permit didn't meet, but did you guys have anything that shows what they did meet?
Yes. Yeah. So there is 21 findings. I guess you would say there's 24 findings because finding number 20 was A, B, and C. Yes. I guess it would be all but 4 of them met. So that's why I didn't really discuss it, because it was, everything met other than the one that we're discussing. And as a reminder, you cannot approve an application, even if just one criteria doesn't meet.
Thank you.
Commissioner Grant, for those who don't know me, I'm Chris Crane. I'm the county's special land use lawyer. That's basically all I do. And there's one point I wanted to clarify, and this is on page 8 of the staff report. In your development code in chapter 6, chapter 6.070 provides a number of provisions that apply across the entire development code. So one of those is 030, and it says when the development code refers to distances, quote, distances are measured horizontally, period. So no matter where in the code a distance is referenced, you measure it horizontally because of this provision. This provision goes on to say when determining the setbacks or structural dimensions, you have to measure along a horizontal plane, blah, 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 but we're not measuring setbacks or structural dimensions here. It's an 8 by 16 foot billboard. Everybody agrees with that. What we're talking about is how do you measure the 1 mile standard? And this code provision says when used in the development code, distances are measured horizontally. So that's how we get to a radial mile rather than a linear mile. Because if you look at a mile and you measure horizontally in all directions, you get a 1 mile radius.
Yeah, I think I got the point where, horizontally, as far as the radius thing is, that kind of just, it didn't seem to be clear to me. And then that really limits capacity, especially for the DAOs, with how narrow points can get. So, but thank you.
I do have a couple questions. So are we really just talking about changing the size of an existing billboard? If this permit is denied, the billboard will stay where it is at the current size?
Correct.
Okay, so we're really just talking about a size change.
Yeah, we're talking about you can do routine maintenance on any billboard, but once you change the structural membrane, ultimately, once you change the post or anything structural, then it has to go through a new sign permit and has to meet current standard.
Okay. So it does seem to me like a lot of this is very much open to interpretation. There's really no black and white answer here. I mean, the conclusion that horizontal means radial, I don't know if logically that really, and if that is applied to any time anything is measured, I think that could get confusing. But so I'm looking at this sentence: the maximum number of advertising signs shall not exceed 8 per mile. But then with no more than 5 on one side of the street. Now with that second part of the sentence, that clearly references the progression of a street, right? Whether it's horizontal or not, because it's referencing one side of the street. So that seems a little odd that within one sentence, 2 different ways of measuring would be addressed. Do you follow my logic?
Commissioner Cornett, can I respond to Philip Mosher?
Yes.
Philip, thank you for reading that very closely. The 8 per mile, the topic of this appeal happens to be, how do we measure this distance? And it's a distance, right? How are we going to measure the distance of a mile? No more than 5 on one side of the street talks about its position, not its distance. And I know that this is a little technical because what we're doing here is technical, but we're going to dissect, because that's what the job asks us to do, is to dissect it to see what makes the most sense. It is black and white. If you look at it by itself, like that sign right there, yeah, that's ambiguous. But in the context of the broad municipal code that we have in front of us, there's no ambiguity. When you read it all in context, it resolves what the intent was. And so in the same sentence or in different sentences or in different parts of the code. Just because in one area we use one standard, we're not held to use that same standard in others. That's all.
So, yeah, so if we're not held to use the same standard across different parts, then that would apply to the radius also. I think also there could be still a logical flaw in that if we're saying that this is all about the distance, a radius is not a distance. That's an area.
A radius is a distance. It's a length. It's a measurement of distance.
But if we're measuring the billboards within a radius, we're not measuring a distance, we're measuring an area.
We're measuring them from a center point. All points equidistant from a center is a circle, but it's also a distance. It's 1 mile away.
Hmm.
And it's actually as precise as it gets in all directions. No more than 8 per mile. How do you measure a mile? A mile is a length, but in all directions, it happens to be a circle, and which is convenient for staff who has to process applications to make these determinations, to use the tools like GIS, which offer no alternatives anyway.
I will agree to disagree on the point.
Okay.
Okay, I got to point this out. It's a distance because it's 1/2 of the diameter. The geometry teachers, no, it's 1/2 of the diameter.
And I'll just say, like, my understanding of what they're saying, like, I hear, like, because the diagram itself used a circle, it can be confusing to the eyes, but it's a lot clearer than drawing a million lines going out from the one billboard. But that's essentially what the circle is. It's just a million little lines, but without the lines there. So it's like, if you were to measure that, I mean, I don't know, it's very clear to me. So I'm like having a hard time how it's not clear.
Well, let's digest all that. Are there any other specific questions for staff?
Not from me.
No.
No, thanks.
Okay, let's hear from the applicant and we'll continue. Yes, now we'll hear from the applicant. Please state your name and address for the record when you come forward.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Commissioner members, my name is Chris Zukin. My address is 5525 Cherry Heights Road here in the Dalles. I am the general manager of Meadow Outdoor Advertising. It's a family business. We've been here since 1981. I'm here tonight because of this interpretation. The maximum number of advertising signs shall not exceed 8 per mile with no more than 5 on one side of the street, which we've underlined on that card up there. And as mentioned, this phrase has been in effect since 1974. When the sign code was reviewed in 81, it was not changed. When it was reviewed in 92, it was not changed. When it was reviewed in 2007, it was not changed. And the intent of no more than 8 advertising signs per mile back there in 74 or before that was that the author of that phrase did not want to see more than 8 signs along the same traveled way as you were driving down the street in the Dalles. Like, they didn't want to see the Burma shave effect. That was the intent. It's fairly clear. The real issue here is that if the radial interpretation is applied throughout the Dalles, that makes every single billboard owned by Meadow Outdoor Advertising non-conforming. And what that means is that none of those billboards can be reconstructed for safety purposes, for aesthetic reasons. If we want to convert a sign with wood poles to steel, we can't do that. From 4 posts to 1 post, can't do that. If there's a road widening and our sign has to be moved 4 feet to get out of the new roadway, we can't just move the sign 4 feet, the sign has to go away. Same thing with the property owner. We have a sign on a piece of property. Property owner wants to build a building, but our sign needs to be moved. We can't move the sign. It's got to go away. We can't relocate under this interpretation. That puts a huge hardship on our business. The natural, or at least depreciable life of a billboard is 30 years. So theoretically, 30 or 40 years of this being in place, billboards that we own in the Dalles could go away. That would obviously be a hardship for our company. Oh, I was going to say something also to put your minds at rest. Not everyone here is going to speak tonight. There's only going to be 4 or 5 of them, and just 4 or 5. And then the rest of the folks here, though, are here and supporting us. And by their smiles, you can tell that they're behind us. So what I would like the Planning Commission to consider tonight is, first of all, to overturn this denial based on that erroneous interpretation, and probably more importantly, to work with the city council to work to approve a code amendment that would insert the word linear into the existing phrase, so we would not have this confusion in the future. Thank you very much. Is it appropriate to ask for questions?
From us to you?
Yeah.
Yes. When you say linear mile, is that the same as road mile?
Sure. I think frankly, road mile is an ambiguous term. That was our attorney, Jim Foster at the time, thought that was, and the reason that came out in that 1992 Planning Commission meeting was the senior planner at the time, Scott Kyler, had suggested that they insert the word square mile instead of per square mile. And so our attorney said, well, let's make it road mile. Well, the Planning Commission in 1992 decided to do neither. They just left it the way it was.
Just another quick question on just some of the process that got us here. This application was denied. There's supposed to be a set amount of time that an applicant is allowed to make an appeal to that denial. That window passed, and then it was chosen to be denied. Why such a long window? This is actually outside of the bounds of when that should be happening. Why did that take so long?
So I know that part of the problem was that some of the dates that were available, we were not available to come to the meetings, and so we asked to push those meetings out. But as far as I can't answer that question. I was not directly involved in submitting the application or asking for an appeal.
Okay, who was?
John Lehman. He's going to speak a couple of people later.
Okay. Another question. You mentioned that you hope that us and along with the city council will take the time after whatever decisions made here to amend this code to make it more clear, to change it to linear mile.
Yes.
When the plan department offered that opportunity before we came here today, why was that opportunity not taken at that time?
Because the planning department, Mr. Chandler had already told me that it was his strong opinion that this was the right interpretation. I didn't see any chance of changing his mind. I met with both Mr. Chandler and Matthew Klebs twice regarding this issue, and I got no movement. So I didn't see how attempting to work with him on a new sign code was going to make any progress whatsoever.
But that any new sign code would have to come to the planning commission, and while we take their information and thoughts, into consideration, that we make our own decisions. So
Absolutely.
even if that was a challenging discussion, that it would have came here for us to make that decision, right?
Yes.
Okay, but you just didn't see that as a possibility or an efficient road.
I did not see it as an efficient road. I was on the 2007 sign committee, and I think we took 9 months to do that work. And I felt that 9 months of work to then not have an improvement on the interpretation that we are currently getting regarding the radial mile was probably not worth the effort. And it was faster, better, easier to come before you as we did.
Okay, got it. Any other questions for the applicant right now?
Yeah, I do have another question.
Okay.
Had you seen that map before that demonstrated, and I don't really know how that was created, that demonstrated if the road mile was applied, there would be, 150 signs or something? Had you, and I'm not sure how that was created, but had you seen that? Do you have comments on that?
It was in one of Mr. Chandler's reports, and so I did see it. And my answer to that is that you have to overlay that map with zoning, property ownership, and a few other things to really come out with the reality. And the reality is that there's probably going to be about 42 billboards in the Dalles. If that makes sense. There could not be 100 billboards in the Dalles because of those other factors,
Parameters.
zoning, property ownership, landowners not being interested in having a billboard on their property.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So, okay, thank you. Next, does anyone wish to testify in favor of the application? If so, please come up, state your name and address for the record. Thank you. And those in favor of the application, aside from the questions that we may ask, please limit your testimony to about 3 minutes.
New chairs since I've been here, more comfy. My name is Dan DeRoe. I live at 1628 West 13th Street in the Dalles. I was asked by the applicant to review the materials, the staff report and other materials, and to make comments if I chose to do so. And of course, I looked it over and felt I needed to be here. If this was just a difference of opinion and interpretation between your current director and myself, I wouldn't be here. But what I looked at just made absolutely no sense to me, given my background here. I was a planning community development director from 1990 to through 2012. And I participated in the two major revisions and a number of lesser revisions in the sign code over all that time. I also participated in hearings and making administrative decisions and so on. And so I'm really here, not so much in support of the applicant, but to give the Planning Commission a little more background, a little historic view of how we interpreted this ordinance over all those years. And it does come down to this, the section 10.13. And also the other one was 10.6, how you measure distances horizontally. And if you remember the discussion we were just having about the 8 per mile and no more than 5 on one side of the street and no closer than 300 feet apart. And somehow that turns into this area measurement. But when you finish the sentence, it says, when measured at right angles to the street center line to which the sign is oriented. So you can't read this sentence unless you read it in total and take it all, look at all those parts. They don't add up to a radial measurement. I tried really hard to look at that sentence and come up with how you would come up with a radial measurement, and I just could not. I don't know how you devise that from this language. And it certainly wasn't the intent or how it's been interpreted, at least during my tenure with the city. If you take that area distance or that area measurement, you get over 3 square miles, which is over 2,000 acres. And it includes an area almost to the airport property on the Washington side. It goes all the way up to the community college, goes out to the corner of 10th and Chenoweth Loop Road. And it goes all the way and includes all of the marina. I mean, that it doesn't make any sense. And it certainly wasn't the way we interpreted things over the years. And so in taking the language of the sign ordinance in a broader sense, through the 2 major amendments we did and all the other minor amendments, the staff and the Planning Commission then, and I believe the City Council who adopted the ordinance, we were all trying to reach a balance of the needs of the traveling public and businesses to advertise with the aesthetics and the effectiveness of having way too many signs. If you have too many signs, they're not going to be read anyway. And they're going to look bad. But we tried to get that balance. Now that balance that's a policy decision that can be changed by the planning commission, ultimately city council, how you want to achieve that balance. But it shouldn't be done through an administrative decision. That is really a policy issue. And now to address this section 10.6, I really need to draw on the back of one of these or one of over there. This section is really kind of key to all of this in my mind as well, because clearly remember the discussions on this issue of how do you measure for setbacks or building heights when you have land that's like this. And I can recall a permit that was issued on a home, a house up near the college, or near the college or the hospital, and it became known as a too tall house because it was on such a steep slope. As you enter from the street, there was just one story, but on the other side there were 3 stories, and that's how much that property sloped. And so we've struggled with this for some time about how are we actually going to measure for setbacks and building heights and that sort of thing. And that's what this section is all about. You can, and it says, or other objects, you could apply this to a sign setback as well. But this had to do with setbacks and building heights and that sort of thing. So show the planning commission. You have a piece of property and you have a slope like this, and then you have the horizontal distance going across here. So this is the land here. And say they build a house up here. So if this is the property line, and you measure 20-foot setback to there, that's going to be this distance. If you measure back 20 feet, you draw the arc. You're going to have a shorter distance where you want the actual setback to be. So the setback should be vertical. So you measure this way, you get 90 degrees, you go up here. If you measure 20 feet here, you're going to be short. So you build a house here, you're not needing 20 foot setback. You're going around with this. Also, regarding how tall a house can be, what's the maximum height? This distance and this distance are different. This could be 3 stories, this could be 1. So how do we measure when we give a building permit? How do you know how high this house is? And so we came up with a solution, a way to measure that. And I can't recall exactly how it is. I think it's like take those 2 measurements and try them and have some time with this. But this section is really about this angle here, the slope of the land, and meeting the setback requirements. And so you could have the front setback, side yard setbacks, rear setback, all of the setbacks, the height of the building, that sort of thing. That's what this entire section here about measurements has to do. That's what it's doing.
Is there anywhere in the code that says that description of measurement is limited to what you just described?
Yeah, I think it says it right there. It says when distances are measured horizontally. So All these things are measured horizontally. When determining distances for setbacks and structure dimensions, all distances are measured along a horizontal plane from the appropriate property line, edge of building, structure, storage area, parking area, or other object. These distances are not measured by following the topography of the land. And in our use of the word topography had to do with slope, because this whole city is on a slope.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any question about that. But you said earlier that an object could be a sign.
Yeah, could be.
Okay.
So you measure a setback, sign has to have a certain setback requirement. So if it's on a slope like this, the setback is determined that way.
So you're saying that the measuring of distance only applies to setbacks and
Well,
cannot be just ubiquitously applied to any measurement of distance throughout the entire code that chapter 10.6 encompasses.
and when this was prepared and discussed and implemented, we never once thought of it being applied to the requirements for how many signs you can have per mile. That was just not in any of our discussion. And had it been, I mean, I don't know how it could have been. So the linear distances, again, if you put a sign there instead of the house, you know, how tall are you going to allow for that sign to be on what side of that slope? And that's how you would determine how tall that sign is, according to the language that there's more to it, but according to the language that I think we took both sides and divided by 2 or some sort of measurement like that.
Sure. I don't think there's any, we understand that. And thank you for the drawing. That is helpful because I think there's probably going to be times later in this meeting where drawings are going to be helpful, but I don't think we're not talking about how far a sign should be away from the road or how tall it should be. We're talking about how we're measuring how many signs within a mile.
Right. And
right.
And so my testimony here is that if I could think of a time, and we talked about this as being an area measurement, I mean, it just wasn't ever discussed that way. It was always discussed and interpreted as a linear measurement. And when you add this, when you include the last part of the sentence, which wasn't included in the earlier discussion, it says, when measured at right angles to the center line of the street to which the sign is centered. You can't go across to the Washington side. You can't go up this way to the community college and be on that center line of that street. You simply can't, it can't be done. So it only means one direction, and that's linear. That's the way we've interpreted it. And I just, again, if this were a matter of opinion, I wouldn't be here, but because of my unique position, but I felt I needed to be.
Thanks. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much. All right. Next person, please. When you come up, please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Scott Hagee, and I live at 6580 Martin Road in the Dalles. So I just wanted to, I'll start off by saying, Mr. Dro there just said that the interpretation when he was here was the interpretation he said. And I'm going to suggest to you the interpretation from 1972 or whatever up until really today has been that same interpretation. And what we're talking about today is now there's a new interpretation. And I tell you that because every permit that they applied for was approved by the planning department and the city of the Dalles that was applied for during that time period up until today when the interpretation changed. So I think that's the important thing to understand is that the interpretation has only changed now, and it was interpreted the same all the way back. And the fact of that is that it was approved by both the planning department and by the city planning commission and or the council. So I think that's an important component. I wanted to talk to you today just quickly from the standpoint of my time in reflecting. I was the director of the port for many years, for 15 years. And my role in this community was essentially to bring businesses here, but also to help the businesses that are here to stay and to expand. And it's an important thing because, and the way we do that is we provide a business climate that is supportive of our businesses. And a lot of what happens at the city level is related to that business climate. And so we get to determine the rules that we have, right? Setbacks, how many signs, all these things we get to determine. And we as a community come together through processes to determine how we're going to do that. But I think it's important to understand we need to have a supportive business economy. And I've been before the city council and the planning commission many, many times to talk about those kind of issues, what's going to be supportive, what's not going to be supportive, et cetera. Unfortunately, this interpretation is something that is very non-supportive of a business that's been in our community for a very long time, that has been an extremely strong corporate citizen. So when I'm talking about business development, my goal is to create jobs for the community and tax base. We need jobs for our citizens, for the kids of our citizens, and we need tax base in order to pay for the services that we have. So changing the interpretation to basically deteriorate the business climate for one of our businesses, and this is a very specific business, is obviously not a very good thing. My experience with Meadows has been back to 91. I came here in 1991, and I've been working with them ever since, both at the port and ever since then. And it's important to understand that the signs that you're talking about are not just signs as a revenue source for Meadow Outdoor Advertising, right? So they are a revenue source for, if you look back here, many of these businesses are people that buy those signs. They need those signs in order to promote their businesses, in order to actually generate revenue for themselves. So it's not just one thing. And it's not just for business too. Government uses those signs. ODOT uses those signs trying to promote, we use seatbelts, whatever the case might be. And then, something you should think about is, how do our nonprofits actually use this? And I can tell you that every time there's something in our community that needs to be gotten out to the public, it could be public health, it could be the senior center, it could be a myriad of things. The first thing you always hear is, we're going to have some billboards. And more often than not, those billboards are provided by Meadow Outdoor at no advertising, because they're a good corporate citizen, and we need good corporate citizens here. Meadows has always been a good corporate citizen, and we certainly need to support them. And I think that this interpretation is something that is non-supportive of them. So I think the planning rules and regulations, while they can change, there's clearly a process to change them. And if we as a community want to change them, and we want the interpretation to be different, if somebody's already said that, we do not want that interpretation to be at the direction of the planning director. It needs to come before the community. People need to say, if we don't want billboards, we think there's too many billboards, we should stand up and say that. We should put rules in place to do that. But right now, for one person to change the interpretation to basically close to obliterate all of the signs that are in our community is not the way we should be doing it. And I'm hoping that you will not support this, or you will support the appeal. So, and I'd be happy to answer questions if you have.
Sure. Just for the record, and just to touch on one of the last sentences you said, when you're talking about obliteration of signs, there's no signs being obliterated in response to any of what's going on today. So all the signs that exist right now will remain in existence and will continue to remain in existence until they are changed.
Yeah, I think that that's the important thing. As you heard from Mr. Zukin, those signs will disappear over time if this interpretation is held, because any change that they need to make to them that's substantial, they'll be denied and they won't be able to do it. So it is essentially a long term, but they will go away.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I had to say. I just wanted to make that really clear.
All right. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your service.
Thank you. All right. Next person, please. When you call it, please state your name and address for the record.
My name is John Lehman. I live at 92464 Biggs Rufus Highway in Rufus, Oregon. I was born and raised in the Dalles, and I truly care about this town deeply. I was going to tell a joke right here, but I won't do it. This is a serious matter. It will have a huge negative impact on Meadow, our customers, our landowners, and all the families and causes that we support. And again, that is a long-term deterioration of our company. It's not fair and not right. I've worked for Meadow for almost 32 years, since December of 1991. And I've worked with many of the Dallas planning staff over the years, including Mr. Dan Dureau here, Scott Kyler, Denise Ball, Dick Gassman, Don Hurt, just to name a few. During my time working with Meadow, it's always been a requirement to show that there are no more than 8 billboards in 1 linear mile section of the highway or street. It's never been talked about multiple streets or any kind of radial measurement at all. Also, during my time working with Meadow, it's been a requirement to show no more than 8 billboards on any 1 linear mile section of the highway or street. I just said that. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
It's okay. Don't be
Thanks for your
nervous.
patience.
No worries.
So over the years, I've created numerous line maps with the planning staff to show the 1 mile inventory along the street or highway in order to secure billboard permits to build new billboards or to rebuild existing signs. Examples of these maps have been included in our original appeal packet. And 8 per mile on a section of street. When I was going in to apply for permits for rebuilding or building new signs, the 8 per mile on a section of street was discussed on every application that I submitted. Some of the applications we have it noted, but we talked about it every time. And the measurement of the Dallas sign code mirrors the ODOT state code, the 8 per mile, no more than 5 per one side. And ODOT measures these 8 per mile using mile points. And we do that anytime we look for a location to see if it's legal with ODOT. You use mile point down the stretch of road. That's exactly what we've always done here with City of the Dalles. I worked with planning staff to develop a line map inventory of billboards along Interstate 84 to ensure that no more than 8 billboards per linear mile section of the interstate were allowed. This was kept updated in the director's office. It was actually a master interstate line map inventory that I worked on with the planners. And I'm not sure if it's still there or not, but we worked on it together to see if a sign could go in or if it was spaced out of that 8 per mile. The intent has always been clear. Billboard sign permits have been approved or denied based on the 8 signs per linear mile. There've never been any, there've never been any public opposition to the linear measurement of 8 billboards per mile that I know of. So in the 32 years that I've been here, Meadow has rebuilt 11 existing billboards and built only 9 new billboards. That's over the last 32 years. And due to strict ODOT regulations and zoning, there are very few viable or permittable locations left to build. With that, I respectfully ask that the Planning Commission instruct staff to reverse this incorrect interpretation of the Dallas sign code. And I thank you for your time. Any questions?
Yep. So you, and pardon me and correct me if I'm wrong, you are responsible for submitting these permits to the city and judging how you measure what Meadows uses as the linear interpretation of a mile, correct?
I have been for quite a bit of my career with Meadow, yes.
Okay. And the way that you measure linear mile per road mile is reflective of how ODOT has you measure their miles because that's their code
Right.
along the highway, correct?
Correct. It's the Dow sign code is mirrored after that.
Okay.
That
Is
same
it
language is in both. Yes.
exact same language?
I don't know if it's exact, but it has the 8 per mile and it has the 5 on one side of the street. And you have to make that with ODOT as well as with the city of the Dalles.
But you did say that ODOT says it has to be per marked mile, right? Like little green signs that says
It has to,
mile
yeah,
84.
it's based on at right angles to the road. You measure what that mile point is there, and then you go down the road in a linear fashion
Mhm.
to the next mile point. And then that's how you measure how many signs within a moving mile.
So the ODOT code does have a linear interpretation of how to measure a distance and a starting and ending point, correct?
I'm not sure what you mean by
Well, it
start.
starts at mile post whatever, 84, and then it ends at mile post 83.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a sign at 83, then you would look at signs from there to 84.
Okay.
But that could change. I mean, that could move back to 82 and a half, and you might take in a new sign and drop off 1 or 2 signs and might open up a spot.
Sure.
Or it might not.
Okay. Does the Dalles code have that specific language of how and where to start a linear mile?
It's just based on linear mile, based on measurement along the road, along the street,
But
as the
the-
code says.
But there's concise, you're saying the ODOT code.
It has the same
has-
basic language as the Dalles, yes.
But does the ODOT language have concise way to be of language of where to begin and end that?
No, I'm just telling you that the requirement for an ODOT permit is measuring distance along a street.
If I can interject here for a second, I think what he's saying, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Okay.
is you go half a mile in each direction from the point of the sign. Is that correct?
No. No.
Is that because I think what you're asking is where does that mile start and end?
Yeah, there's not really a designation of where it starts or ends.
Excuse me.
It's-
So what I'm asking is you are using your interpretation of an ODOT code and applying it to the Dalles City Code
No,
because it is similar.
no, what I'm saying,
Basically mirrors the language.
what I'm saying is the Dalles City Code is a mirror based on the ODOT code. They have very similar language. And the way that you measure that distance along a roadway is mile point. You don't measure it through a radius or a mile out away. You measure it along the road.
Okay.
Mile point. I mean, it's the basic measurement for along the roadways and how to measure where signs are in a moving mile.
Okay. I don't want to get caught in the weeds on that. I just kind of
Okay.
wanted to touch base because we don't have that code in front of us, so we can't use it for any type of decision making. It's also not the Dalles City Code, which the Planning Commission that's what we base our decisions on, the Dalles City Code.
Yeah, no, I guess the point, and I apologize, the point I was trying to make was that it uses similar language, 8 per mile, 5 on one side of the street or highway, in their case, highway. And it also they use mile point, which there was questions about how could you measure along a twisting, turning road? You use mile point. And that's a simple way to do it. And that's the way it's always been done with me here and working with ODOT.
Got it. Okay. Any other questions?
Can I just ask, clarify a question? I'm sorry, I'm not very, so the decision today is gonna be moving forward to let Meadows, if they can, or they have to get more signs or make the signs bigger. Am I?
I mean, it could be both. What's specifically today, the reason this application came to the plan department is because we wanted to make one sign bigger. However, based on how we interpret this today, it will allow for how future applications will be.
And that was my only concern, that, okay, so this one is gonna be make bigger, right? And so if we change the wording, then they can go back and the ones they already have, they can make every single one bigger, right? Potentially.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts?
Can I speak to that just briefly?
You may.
The signs that we have work fine for us now. We needed to try this out to see if and what the interpretation, to get this interpretation out, that because it had been talked about prior to my application. The signs that we have on the interstate are all, and on state highways, which some of the roads in the Dalles are on state highways. They are permitted with a state permit. They can't get any bigger than that. So those state will always stay the same. And the other signs that we have, there's no reason for us to make them bigger, except in this one case. I mean, it's a possibility, but there's really not a big push for that. It's just that if this interpretation stands, all of our signs are going to be non-conforming.
Right, but I'm not saying I'm gonna vote against it. I'm just clarifying, because let's say we say yes to this, and then you were talking about your signs eventually gonna have to be replaced, right? So then that means that you can replace that little one with a big one, correct?
Well, yes, we could on, I guess we could on in-town surface streets where it's not highway. Most of them are permitted with ODOT because of the highway system, the interstate, and the highway system that goes through town. So they have to stay with what the permit is, unless we have a different permit that we could issue or move to it. So it's not going to happen very often.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
You bet. All right, next person, please come up and state your name and address for the record.
Thank you so much, Chair Cornett, members of the commission. My name is Ty Wyman, and I believe that my address is already in the record. I appear, of course, as counsel for the appellant. I would begin by thanking you, all of you. I recognize that you're volunteers and do not envy you that you're put in the position of having to pick one or the other here. So I would also like to thank the planning staff, particularly, I believe, Ms. Webb, because over the last month, our firm made public records, requested public records. And I think that from our perspective, that process went very smoothly when it doesn't always do so. So a shout out there to, I believe it's Ms. Webb. Anyway, take credit. Good turnout tonight. Clearly, well, you're getting lots of evidence. You're also asking a lot of questions, good questions, which from my perspective is so appreciated, because that's really what we're looking for, is where are the touch points, where are the questions that you have in your mind. This case is coming together in an odd way procedurally. Typically, you have an application that may be this thick that has got most of the evidence in it. We don't have that in that case. In this case, the evidence is coming to you really quite late with the staff report, the follow-up memoranda. So I certainly think it's appropriate and would request that you take additional evidence, either through a continued hearing or through an open record period. If from what I can tell, we are plumbing somewhat the depths of history of your records. I believe that my client has some records also. I don't know your schedule. I don't know when this would normally come back to you. I believe me, please. we don't want to, no one wants to dump on you the volume of information that you got just within the last 4 days here again. So I'm not asking for a record open period that leads all the way to the next hearing. I recognize the need for you, the appropriateness of getting you the information a week or so ahead of time. And perhaps by then it'll be raining anyway. So I don't, if you do go with a record open period, then I would request 14 days, assuming that you would want to bring this back on an agenda in a month, but I don't know your agendas. Obviously, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have at this point, but failing any questions, I think we are ready to, we've taken notes here. We'll re-listen to the questions and the points that were made, and then we'll do some more homework and present it to you.
Are you formally, Chair Cornett? Thank you. I was just about to ask that. Requesting that the public, the time for, are you formally requesting an extension, or are you suggesting that we?
No, I'm formally requesting it. Sorry.
Yeah, that was not clear. So
Sorry.
you are
Yes.
formally requesting the public hearing remain open.
Yeah, certainly that the record remain open. I believe that in your initial statement, you described your ability in your on your decision to either continue it or hold the written record open for a minimum of 7 days. I'm going to assume if you only want to hold the written record open, and I would completely understand that, that is certainly the norm. I was just requesting 14 days just because it's.
So let me just reread this. Item 4, during the hearing, some important standards standards apply. Fourth, prior to the conclusion of any public hearing, which we are in, any participant, which would be you, may request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application. If such a request is made, in which case you say you are formally making this request, the law states the commission must grant the request by either continuing the hearing to a time and date at least 7 days from the date of the initial hearing, which is now, or the record must be kept open for a period of at least 7 days. So you are making a request to keep the public hearing open, and you would like it to be 14 days as opposed to 7 to our next planning commission meeting, which would be 2 Thursdays from now.
Yeah, that's correct.
What do we do when someone formally requests the public hearing to be left open?
Thanks, Ty. So the way the statute works, and this is ORS 197.797 subsection 6. And it says that if someone requests the record be held open, you have to do that. And you can either hold it open for additional written evidence and then review that evidence when it comes in and show up, then, in a future meeting, deliberate and make your decision, but you don't have to take any new public testimony, just written evidence. Alternatively, you could continue the hearing for at least 7 days or 14 days and continue what we're doing tonight and continue to take written evidence as well as verbal testimony. So it's up to you whether you want to continue the public testimony portion by just continuing the hearing, or close the public testimony and just hold the record open for additional written evidence. And I think, as Mr. Wyman said, that's usually what happens is jurisdictions will often choose to hold the record open so people can put new evidence in the record, which you would then review before making your final decision. And the way that often works, there's another law that says if somebody puts new evidence, actually it's a later part of that same statute, if somebody puts new evidence in the record, everybody gets a chance to respond to it. So if you hold the record open for 7 days and people put new stuff in the record, people get another 7 days to respond to that. After that, you can close the record. And the applicant at that point gets a final 7 days, so a third 7-day period to submit any final written argument, but no new evidence. So we call that the 777 rule. And then you would come back in a month, review everything that's come in, and deliberate and make your decision, but without any additional testimony. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Chair Cornett, can I follow up? So, Chris, does that mean the record stays open for 21 days technically, or just for 7 with these 2 options to extend?
Technically, the record stays open because the applicant's final written argument, which is the only thing that can be submitted in that final 7-day period, is in the record. It's part of the record. So you have to include it in the record. So you can't close the record until that final written argument has been received.
So if the chair were to allow for written evidence to be submitted into the record going forward, we would set that at a date certain,
Mhm.
21 days from tonight.
Well, we'd be clear that any new evidence has to be submitted within 7 days. So if somebody submits a new map with showing where highway billboards are, differentiating from on-street billboards, then at the end of 7 days, you can't submit anything new. But in the second 7 days, you could file your own map or take issue with stuff that came in that first 7 days, responsive evidence or rebuttal evidence. After that, no new evidence. And anything that comes in after that is rejected.
And let's say the chair would like to do exactly what you just said, word for word. What would be the next step?
Well, at the close of the hearing tonight, everybody gets their calendars out and figures out how you want to do this.
You'll still be here for that part of it, right? All right.
I will.
Thanks.
So.
Okay.
But I will say that the statute's pretty clear. Once somebody requests that the record be held open, you have to do that.
It
So,
doesn't seem like there's a decision to be made here.
well, do you want to continue? Do you want to continue?
There is.
Testimony?
Yeah.
Yeah, of
Or
course.
do you
yeah.
just want to do the rest in writing?
Tonight, we will be continuing with public verbal testimony because these people showed up and we want to respect their time. We absolutely want to respect everyone's time. After tonight, the verbal testimony will be closed. We will let it stay open for written record, and then we'll just have to tackle this at the next time. So we'll continue on with public testimony since you all did come and show up, and we appreciate the community input and just general support on this process. So we'll continue with public testimony. Next person, please. Please state your name and address for the record.
Wilcox, West 7. I spent 32 years. Jim Wilcox, 416 West 7 in Dallas. I spent 33 years in the real estate industry. In the 2 years since I retired, I spent way too much time. Oh, that was a problem. Somebody turned the microphone off. No, that wasn't a problem. Probably should have left it off. I spent time in front of the Planning Commission. I spent 6 years on city council. And probably one of the hardest things I ever did was appoint people to the Planning Commission, because I knew that the only job that was harder in any community is school board. So be glad you're not on the school board, you're here. But what you have here is some institutional memory that is not in the planning office. There's not one person in the planning office that was here in 2006 for the records they were digging back. Not one. Not one person on city council that was here when those decisions were made and when this code was being enforced. The only people that are here there's 3 of us here that served together on city council at the same time. And Mr. Zukin was on Planning Commission, served, and on city council, served well. His employee spoke well about how he had worked with planning staff and how the measurements came out. And Dan Duro will appreciate that. And I see Carolyn Wood in the room. Dan, I agree with you. Dan and I had some battles, and I always respected him. But Dan doesn't lie, and he's true to what he says. And he was, we didn't agree on interpretations sometimes, but here you've got brand new staff making a new interpretation on something that's been interpreted a different way since before 1992. The code hasn't changed. You have a code that the little A-frame signs, sandwich signs, it's over 11 pages long. Billboards are mentioned in 2 short sentences. But you've got a total sign ordinance of over 30 pages. Yes, it's time to go through the whole stinking ordinance because there's holes. Gentlemen referred to things that, oh, if it's over here in this section, so that applies to everything. Well, usually when that's the case, there's a reference in the section, referencing back. It's not in this section about billboards as far as how things are supposed to be measured. It's not referenced. So if you're in the sign business, and let's just take it to that, and I'm new to it, I would come in, I'd read that sign ordinance, and I'd go to all the references and I'd figure out what I'm doing. And I'd do just exactly what Meadow is doing here without their background knowledge. And I would come up with the conclusion that I'm coming up with because I don't have that other thing referenced. I read every board packet. I read every staff report. And I can tell you that you have people in the room right now that have already testified that that's the way it's been interpreted up to this time. And this is a bent interpretation. And you can say, oh, they can still have their sign. Be clear. Anytime they change anything, it comes in front of the planning staff and they can hash can it right there. And they would have to come right back to you again and again and again. If this stays, it puts every billboard in jeopardy. I don't think that's right. And you're doing it without any legislative action. It's all by staff. Your job is to interpret what's there. Your job is also to take into account what has happened before, how it's interpreted before. And if it was wrong, maybe it's time to go back to city council and fix the darn ordinance. But don't try and do it here. That's not your job. I strongly support the appeal. And I think there's a whole bunch of people in this room do. And there's a whole bunch of people not in this room that depend on those billboards for their advertising to bring people into town to generate jobs, business, and taxes to pay for the room we're in today. So thank you. I didn't get into real specifics other than it's not specific in this section of the ordinance where you reference for measurement. Mr. Dro was very plain on how it was done. And God, I hate this when I can't think of your name. When John Lehman, who has worked with the planning department for 30 years, and all of a sudden it changed. You really need to take that into consideration. I don't care what else comes in. This is a turnaround that you're trying to change something that's been going on for 30 years and nobody has been killed in the application of the way it's been applied for the last 30 years. Questions?
Chair Cornett, you mind? Sure, go ahead. Hi, Jim.
Aren't you glad I'm here, Jonathan?
Oh,
Probably
boy.
not.
You know, you're clearly so dedicated and passionate about your time in this city. And you know, I care for you very deeply. You and I have been through a lot.
We got more to go through.
And I'm not, lawyer-client privilege. I'm not going to get into the specifics. But I will say, you've told me on a number of occasions, boy, Jonathan, we are so glad that you're here. Sorry, I'm here. So is Josh. And we're looking at it like aliens from outer space with wide eyes. We don't know anybody in this room. We weren't here 30 years ago. We just have the code in front of us. The only thing that matters really is the intent of the city council, not Dan Durow, who I've heard nothing but great things about. And I have no doubt that he's not lying. I just think he's wrong. No malice.
Your research went back to 2006, am I correct? Both digital and hard copy?
We had permits from, I think, 1984.
Okay.
And no mention, like only 4 of them that mentioned anything to do with this.
And I just got to interject there. So you are saying there's an inconsistency in how those applications were submitted and approved.
Yeah, extremely. Yeah, there's the evidence is not in front of us to show that this is how it was interpreted and consistently. And that's what we found with all the research that we've done, of all the files that are available to us in this building.
I would say this then, what's on paper ain't what's going on. The signs are there and they were permitted, period. They went through the process. They went through the planning office. They followed the rules that were put upon them at the time. Don't go back and say, oh, you didn't follow the rules. They did.
So I can comment on that as well. So of those 15 permits, 4 of them were approved by the planning department in the wrong zone. There's 2 in residential zones up on 10th and Trevitt. They were approved in 2012. Not allowed to have a billboard in a residential zone. So there's inconsistency even in how you apply where the billboards are supposed to be located.
I can tell you there's inconsistencies in every ordinance, having served on city council, having dealt with planning issues. There's a lot of things that haven't followed the rules, to the detriment sometimes of the city, sometimes to the benefit of who was doing it because of who it was. So none of these ordinances are perfectly enforced or following. People were doing what they thought they would do. I was on the comprehensive plan housing committee in 1992. It stretched into about 94. Scott Kyler was leading us at the time, was the staff member assigned to us. And it got down to the final public hearing, and Scott made a presentation like yours, and I'm going to name names. Ken Farner said, Scott, steering committee, or are we steered? Scott sat down and listened to the public. He was gone when all the ordinances were written from that comprehensive plan. Again, maybe Don heard. We had nobody in the planning office from the time we did the comprehensive plan, and all of that discussion, the institutional memory was gone by the time those ordinances were written in 96, 97. And none of them were sign ordinances because those haven't been touched in forever. So the lack of continuity over a long period of time causes issues with all the ordinances. But if you've got one where they're out there, you live with it, but now you're starting to look at chopping things down a little bit at a time, or putting a business in a position of having done the right thing. None of those signs were put up without a permit. None of them, or at least you haven't proven to me they have. So they did what they thought was right and tried to do it again. And now they're getting caught because of a different interpretation of the measurement. And Dan explained why they measured. ODOT measures another way. Roads don't go straight. So if you're going to refer to the road, that's the way it works. And if you're going to have advertising, you got to have it on the road. It's just the way it works. So I would hope you would take those issues into consideration when you make your decision. And thank you for serving. Thankless job. You missed the steak feed. I didn't. I ate there before I came here.
All right, any questions? All right, thank you.
all.
Next person, please come on up and state your name and address for the record. Are there any other people? Okay, got it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My name is Ryan Rupert. I live at 1819 Cliff Street here in the Dalles. I don't get very much opportunity to talk to the planning department. I've been doing a lot of skiing over the last few years, and I hadn't thought about signs since I did gorge windsurfing, and I had to have a special boat in order to hold my sign up against the wall. So, and I did that. The question I've got, I think it's pretty simple. The state highway, the federal highway, the county all measures their miles by the little green signs that we have distributed throughout the state. I don't see any other way that if you have a regulation that says no more than 8 per mile, why would you need to be looking at anybody else's definition of mile, except that now there is GIS information. The state highway never looked at GIS information, doing things radially. Right? The Fed certainly didn't when they decided to build Interstate 84. And I think that is the interpretation that all of the rest, I don't know about the rest of the cities, but all of the organizations that Mr. Zukin has to deal with in order to put up a sign is using. So it makes sense that in the past, the Dalles has always used a linear even though it wasn't described as linear, it was just road mile. Now we have GIS that, yes, it's great for certain things, but I don't think it's great for this. You have any questions? Thank you very much.
Any questions? No. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next person, any other favors, anyone else in favor of the application wish to testify? Okay, does anyone wish to testify in opposition to the application? If so, please come up, state your name and address for the record. Okay, does anyone wish to does anyone wish to testify that is not in favor or does anyone wish to testify that is not in favor or opposition, or that would just like to ask questions? Just neutral questions, thoughts, comments, etc. No? Okay. Do any of those in favor of the application wish to rebut the argument for the opponents? There were none. Once again, state your name and address to the record. Do the commissioners feel they have enough information to make a decision? At this time, we can ask staff, city attorney. We can have other people come up and ask them questions again, not as we're digesting this. This will actually be the last opportunity for us to do this, because after today, verbal testimony will be closed and we'll only be relying on written testimony.
I do have a couple questions. Philip Mosher. Has staff looked at how this is worded and handled in the county or in neighboring counties or cities, anything like that? Any references nearby?
Well, I have not personally. Yeah, because we're enforcing the Dallas Municipal Code, so I have no reason to look at what the county's doing.
Okay. And then, so what would you say is the clearest language that you could find anywhere that references a radiant mile?
I can answer that question. Sure. The clearest, simplest language is going to be found in TDMC 10.6.070.030 A2. And it says measurements are shortest distance. And then it has an explanation of what that means. Gives some examples, but that's about as simple as it gets. Measurements are shortest distance. And I guess I think everybody knows what the shortest distance between 2 points is, right? I think it is a line, yeah. Line.
I have a question. Do you have a map showing all the existing signs and how many would be non-conforming to this rule if we interpret it in a radius?
No, ultimately, to the point everyone's making about non-conforming. I mean, ultimately, if a few signs are removed, many billboards will be conforming. I would have to go through and figure out exactly. Yeah, we'd have to do. I don't exactly know how we would do it right off the top of my head, but yeah, I mean, you could cherry pick a couple signs out of the entire inventory, and you could have a bunch of conforming signs. There's these 30-year life on some of these billboards. If a billboard goes away and it can't be placed on a property anymore, that means the billboard right across the street might be in compliance. It doesn't mean that's what, maybe a point we're trying to make is, well, the point I'm trying to make with that is they're not done forever. There may be billboards that have to be removed because they do not comply, but it doesn't mean that all billboards all over are going to be non-conforming and stay that way forever.
Sure. But there are some multiple billboards that would not comply with this interpretation.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think we saw on the map earlier when we showed the 14 that are around each other. I mean, we also have a list of non-conforming billboards because they're in the wrong zone. As I mentioned earlier, there's probably 9 or 10 of those out of the 42 in the city. I mean, you could look at the non-conformity, no matter how we measure it. You could look at multiple signs are non-conforming, some of which should have never been approved in the first place because they were approved in incorrect zones. So there is a list of non-conforming signs currently, no matter how you do a measurement of it.
So like if there was, a billboard that exceeded its life expectancy and say for safety reasons it needed to be replaced, about how many is with that radius, it kind of limits the capacity in our area, correct?
Commissioner Grant, I'm looking at your code now for non-conforming structures, and that's what these are. Where a billboard's allowed in the zone, it's an allowed use. It might just be a non-conforming structure if there are, for example, 9 now within the radius, right? And it specifically says if a non-conforming structure is damaged by any means, the structure may be reconstructed. So this notion that if the sign is damaged somehow that it can't be repaired or replaced is just not true. I mean, your code specifically allows a non-conforming sign to be reconstructed and goes on to say ordinary maintenance and repair is permitted. So these signs can be maintained for a very long time, including reconstructed. So this notion that they'll all suddenly evaporate is not supported by your code. And I think Josh's point is a good one, where you've got a sign that's in a radius that includes 9 signs. One of them goes away. The other 8 are now conforming.
But I think with the zones, we're kind of limited into the zoning, and then just the layout of the city of the Dalles, going by a radius makes it very difficult.
I thought about that looking at one of the maps that was up. As everybody knows, the Dalles tends to be more of an east-west, have an east-west orientation. So it becomes a problem if you want to put signs to the north and south, because to the north is the river, to the south, you're outside the city. But east and west, you've got a lot of distance to play with.
Thank you.
Can I just say, Chair Cornett, that if there's issues with this interpretation, they need to be supported by substantial evidence. Very little of what I heard tonight really qualifies as that, in my opinion. But if the Planning Commission would like to see something completely different from its sign code, that would be great direction to provide staff. I can't speak for Josh all the time, but we'd be happy to do it. But for now, based off of the text, it's sort of what it is.
I have just a clarifying question, because it sounded like there were some signs that were permitted by the Dalles and some that were permitted by the state or by ODOT. Would that total number of signs just be a total number of signs, or a total number of signs permitted by one entity? You know what I'm saying? Like if some were like not approved, if they're not filed with us, why would we count them? I guess is my question.
Oh, I think, yeah, it is a good question. I
think the answer is because your code doesn't distinguish between them, right? It just says if there are a certain number of signs within a certain distance, you count them, and it doesn't distinguish. This gets back to what I think I've heard from a lot of people all over the issue is that this provision we know is 50 years old and has never been revised. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff in the sign code that really needs attention. If we can dig into this, and I understand from Josh and Jonathan that that's in the near term plan, is to revisit the sign code and revise, and that's something that I think we should pay attention to. If we're going to limit signs by the number of signs within a certain distance, let's distinguish between state, federal, local, or clarify that they all count one way or the other, right? But right now, the sign that your code doesn't distinguish, it counts all signs.
Any other thoughts or questions?
Mr. Chair, if I want to reiterate one more point about the structure of your code. I've heard from several folks that this provision about how to measure distance is not referenced in the sign code, so therefore it doesn't apply. And that's just simply not the case. If you look at Article 6.070, the first section of that article, 6.070.010, expressly says the measurements in this article explains how measurements are made in the development code. And then the remaining sections of that article include things like how to rounding measurements, determining zone boundaries, measuring height, setback averaging, measuring tree diameter. So that entire article is dedicated to establishing how you measure different things for purposes of the development code. These measurements apply throughout the code. You don't need a cross-reference because the first section says these measurements apply to the entire development code.
So you're saying that how the code is written, that definition of measurement is at the beginning, and then everything that we're talking about is essentially a subsection.
Right. It's
So it
not
happens
at the beginning.
after
It's 10 point article. It's article 6.070. So it's kind of buried in the middle, but yeah, it applies across everything.
Okay.
Much like the definitions up in the beginning of the development code apply throughout the entire code. You don't have to cross-reference them every time.
And chapter 10.6, where article 6.070 is found, are the general, it's literally called general regulations applicable throughout the entire Title 10, all of it. It's not just article 6.070 as if we're cherry picking it. Every single article in the chapter applies throughout the entire development code.
One more clarifying question. I think in my brain, it makes sense that ODOT, like they were talking about, uses highway miles. Is it typical, because we're talking about a planning department, which is not something that depends on highway miles, do most planning departments and planning statutes operate under the assumption of a radial mile?
Like I said, I would have to look further into that.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, I can only, like I said, I can only
like
go.
industry standard.
Yeah, I can only really go what's in front of us.
Totally.
Right. Yeah.
I will say, staff is already intending on taking a deep dive, as has been mentioned a few times now, into looking at this sign code. One of the things we're going to have to look into is, as Commissioner Portela just indicated, was, hey, let's distinguish between ODOT signs and other types of signs. Best practices are going to be for us to examine what best practices are, right, for the future revisions to this code that will be proposed, TBD. But for now, it doesn't matter, in my legal opinion, whether a different jurisdiction has word for word what our code says and ends up using a different measurement. Makes no difference whatsoever, for what it's worth. But it's a good thought to think about how others. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel.
No, yeah, I think like my thinking is just like the argument of ODOT versus a planning department would then be invalidated.
Sure.
Because ODOT functions off of distance
Yeah.
in that way. And of course they would use a linear mile, where like a planning department, just by happenstance, industry standard will use this, like as a way to really frame that.
Yeah.
Less really considering what another city uses.
Sure.
But more trying to like fix my frame of mind to frame that in the right way, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm going to take partial responsibility for muddying those waters for you, because when I was asking those questions about the difference of, our code versus the ODOT code and how they use it and how the applicant applies the interpretation of the ODOT code and then uses it for us, I was trying to illustrate that provision that ODOT uses does not exist in our code, which it doesn't. And that was my fault. I didn't.
No, I think I was like trying to get what you were getting at too.
Yeah. And going along with that, and this is what Jonathan just said, and this is important for all of us to remember, how other people do things doesn't matter. How we This is the City of the Dalles code only. It is a microcosm to that. We don't take other court cases. We don't take other land use decisions. That's for someone else to decide. A judge can decide that. City council may take that into consideration. LUBA may take that into consideration, but the planning commission, the 7 of us here, do not. Any other questions? Okay, I want to mention one more thing that how we make decisions is just for our discussion. And, I'll probably restate this again when it becomes the time for us as the commissioners to talk about this more specifically. Again, the decisions that we make work within the microcosm of the Dalles Municipal Code. We do not take it, unfortunately, while these things are important, we do not take into account how it affects one single business or many businesses or businesses that are yet to come. It does not take into account economical development or anything regarding the Dalles. We don't take those things into consideration because it's not our place to decide what's best for a certain business or not, or just the overall vitality of the Dalles. It's just the code. It's 3 lines. That's what we focus on. We also focus on historical decision-making, which we have found to be inconsistent. I'd also like to point out that, yes, we will be making a very strong effort in the way that we valiantly tried to amend the RV park code ordinances that we're still working on. We will be working on this as well. However, we must be considerate and careful about how we make these decisions today. And for this appeal, as Commissioner Pena pointed out, the decision we make on this will have an effect on how we can modify or change or replace ordinances regarding billboards and signs in the future. So we have to be considerate about that. Also, we cannot make any changes to existing ordinances that are in the middle of an appeal. Is that correct?
Chris? No, I think we can go because they're measured by the time the application submitted. Whatever the law was is the standards that are applied to how anybody who's reviewing it examines whether the application should be approved or denied.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying we can't be like, let's change the sign ordinance now. Why not?
You can change it. You just couldn't apply it to this permit.
Yeah, right. So
Right, yeah.
Apologies. For the purpose of this and trying to get to a better decision or some decision that through whatever voting process, our voting process we feel is right, we can't make those changes now. However, the decision we make will have an effect on how we can apply those changes later.
Your applications.
Sorry. I was not very clear about that. So it's important to think about all these things. And I think for now, unless anyone in the audience would like to come back and excuse me, I had to say one more thing. And this is in response to one of the testimonies that was in favor of the applications. It is our job to change the ordinances, think about the ordinances, apply the ordinances for signs. That's 100% us. So just remember that responsibility is ours, is not someone else's. And that's all I have. That's all the statements I have about it. Does anyone have any questions, further statements? Otherwise, I'm going to close the public testimony, but the written record will remain open. Do we have a choice on allowing the request to be 7 days or 14 days?
You do. It just can't be less than 7.
Okay, it's just going to be 7.
Okay.
For written record. The reason for that is because our meetings happen on the first and third Thursday of every month. So in an effort to expedite this and make this efficient, I would like to have this meeting and revisit this in 2 weeks. 7 days plus 7 days is 2 weeks.
So the statute allows the applicant, it says, once the record's closed to everybody else, the applicant gets a final 7 days to file a final written argument. No new evidence, but their final argument based on whatever evidence is in the record. So that's why it ends up being 21 days total.
Sorry,
because-
777.
Right, exactly. Because if new evidence comes in that first 7 day period, you have to allow people another 7 days to respond to that. And then you can close the record for any new evidence, but the applicant then gets that third 7 days for their final written argument.
Okay, that's
And then you would reconvene the fourth week, a month from now, after you've had a chance to review all that stuff, and then you would make your decision.
Okay, and that's great too, because that allows us a full week of no other further information coming in to be able to do that. So yeah, 777. Apologies for not following that math.
Can we, I want to get those in the record if it's okay with everyone, just so we've got it in the minutes.
Yes.
So any new evidence would have to be submitted to the planning department by close of business on Thursday, the 14th, next Thursday. What's going to work for you? What 7 days from now would be the close of business on Thursday, the 14th for any new evidence. Any responsive evidence would have to be submitted by close of business on the 21st, and then the applicant's final written argument by close of business on September 28th.
Okay.
And then it's up to you whether you want to do it on the 5th or the 19th. John, I'm hearing from your city attorney that he won't be here on the 5th. So if you wanted to wrap this up on the 19th, that would work with his schedule at least.
October 19th.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Does that work for the applicant?
Thank you again for the record, Ty Wyman. I'm sorry, does what work for the applicant?
October 19th for revisiting this meeting.
Yeah, where you alone determine your docket. We're not going to pretend to tell you when you have to reconsider this. I would, though, note, if you're not going to come back to this until October 19th, then I think we could go 14, 7, and 7.
It's at the discretion of the planning commission, how you want to structure those dates.
Yeah, so then it would be 20, the record would close then in 28 days, which has got to be it's like 6th, 5th. So that would give, that's going to give you a couple of weeks with a closed record in front of you.
Okay. Why?
For 14 days?
Yeah.
Oh, just I mean, people are plumbing depths of history. This is not a simple matter of, there's been a lot of reference to what has happened since 2006. And then we hear even before that. And I think there are very valid questions about the permits that have been issued here historically. And that, in my experience, which is pretty considerable, finding that historic evidence can actually be more difficult than finding, what's the traffic, what are the traffic effects of this added square footage or what have you, where you can simply go to expert testimony. So that's why I asked for the 14.
Okay. 14's fine. 14 days.
Thanks.
It's
thank you for
it's
that.
irrelevant at this point because the time we have to wait for the next.
Okay, then for
meeting.
the record, new evidence by the close of business on the 21st, first new evidence by the 21st, responsive evidence by the 28th, and then applicant, you get your final written argument by close of business on October 5th.
Okay. And revisiting this meeting, October 19th. Another question. Can any participant request that the public hearing be open again on the October 19th meeting?
Well, they can request, but you're not required to grant it.
Got it. Okay. I only ask these questions. We all want to be efficient with our time. These are important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's not, and it's not saying that I want to move on from it. It's just like we have other stuff to do. There's only so many hours in a day. There's only so many meetings per year that, we have things to do. Okay. That being said, the public hearing is now closed. Written record remains open until the dates identified. That closes this portion of the hearing. Item 8, there will be no resolutions. Are there any staff comments or project updates?
Yeah, why not? Thank you again for everyone who showed up. We really appreciate this.
Yes, thank you.
In the mix, I'll let it maybe settle a little bit, so I don't spoil the announcement here.
This is, hey, Chris, you come any.
Really nice.
Room only.
Yeah, that's awesome.
The sign is already there. So the application is just.
Tom, this is Tom's first time. A lot of people's first time. Sorry to cut you off when that guy was talking. That was about ready to get like, I haven't seen you in council. I guess we haven't really had council. Oh, like, no.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know, that was about ready to get. They don't meet in August.
Yeah.
And we went a whole month without any council meetings. So the next one will be fun.
It's fine.
All right.
Coaches it up.
So
Okay.
I think it's quiet enough. I
Yeah,
just
thank you.
wanted to announce our new associate planner, Frank Glover. This is his first week.
Oh, wow.
Frank, they're all this exciting.
Yeah.
It's all this good.
We're really grateful to have Frank joining the team, and yeah, he's 3 days in and this is what he saw. So it's not always like this, Frank. Mostly nobody shows up.
Mostly it's like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're like baptized in fire.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, thank you all. Thank you everyone who attended. And then I just want to let you know next week next would be on the 21st. We will have another application in front of us. So I would request all of your attendance and go from there. And we'll have these dates on the dates for this appeal. We'll have them, listed and planned future agendas. And yeah, that's about it.
Cool. I just want to say thank you all for being here. It's so nice when I could just hear everyone's voice, and we all have great questions and great thoughts. It's invaluable. It's awesome. So thank you. And this is a very good test of how good we are at this job. And it doesn't, and this is important for me to say. I could have said it during the all that was going on, but it's important for me to say this. It doesn't, remember, no one's going to be mad or upset, or there is no negative feeling or emotion about how this happens. We just do our job the best way that we think that we can. We may disagree, and that's okay. That's why there's 7 of us, and that's why we're all different. So please be, I think the best way to say it is please be honest with your direction and how you feel about it. That's why there's 7 of us, and that's why we're all here. Everyone had really great questions and thoughts tonight, so that's awesome, and I appreciate it big time.
Yes, I'm not gonna be able to be here on the 19th.
Okay.
Doing something else.
Oh, okay.
I won't be able to either.
Okay. October 19th.
Yes.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
So that means the other 5 have to be here.
Yeah. If we don't have a quorum, we are,
Up a creek.
yeah.
Right.
If you're not gonna, I mean,
I can be here.
if you aren't gonna be here, that's fine. Just, we need
Well,
to,
let's make sure that everybody
Yeah.
else can.
yeah.
I'm supposed to be out of town, but I'll come back early. It'll be fine.
Okay.
Everybody else good?
Yeah, I'll
The
be here.
19th?
So, yeah. I'll be here. Okay. Excellent. I have nothing else. Anyone else?
Yeah, just still keep. So to me, the logic step that I'm having difficulty with is I totally see the argument in the language about no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
We can't.
All right.
Yeah. We got to.
Okay.
We got to save it.
All right.
Sorry. Yeah. So, we saw, I bet I knew half of the people in this room,
Right.
at least. I know everyone else did too, if not more.
Mhm.
Don't talk about it.
Mhm.
People can say things to you, just smile and walk away. I mean, it's like, it's not a joke. Yeah.
If I may, just to clarify that you can talk amongst yourself as long as there's never more than 4 or 3 of you in the conversation, right? That would be a forum. Deliberating on matters. Planning.
But we can.
To each other, that's fine, just.
Small groups.
Small groups.
Yeah.
And you can talk to staff all you want, that's also not, that's considered part of it.
Okay.
Outside of the city, you can't talk about matters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it.
For instance, I talked to Jonathan and Josh this morning, just like, getting everything in a straight line. And any of us can use that resource. And I recommend you should, if you want to,
Just to have your understanding be clear, that's a benefit that we have.
So Chair Cornett, I was just gonna say, it's my first, I think it's my first planning commission in person.
Which is nice, also very nice.
Thank you. I'm getting claps.
I've seen you.
Yeah. I appear as a name on Zoom. Sorry, I'm very useful behind a camera, like not behind the camera because my camera's off, but like I'm very useful at my desk. Because I'm as attentive as I am when I'm at home or wherever I am watching this, as I am right here. It's just a lot easier for me when I have my computer and the code and all the things that I need to have in front of me to weigh in on comments that happen. But I'm going to try more of an effort to start making it to these meetings in person for the Planning Commission specifically. And as Cody mentioned, please feel free to reach out to the planning staff, to me, to Josh, not to Chris though, he's off limits, but everybody else. Feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions on anything. Happy to talk. I think the only person I've talked to actually has been Cody. But if any of you have questions,
Good conversations.
we always have great conversations. We're the best. So thanks so much.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, gang. All set then? Okay, meeting adjourned.
What a party. Billboard party.
Party. Party.